The hour of convening having arrived, all members of the House will please report to their assigned seats. All members of this House will please report to their assigned seats. The clerk will ring the bell. We're going to have the morning roll call. All members present will please vote green to signify their presence in the chamber, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. Doorkeepers will please close the doors and keep them closed. Good morning. We will begin our day with scripture reading and prayer this morning by the chaplain, after which we will pledge allegiance to the flag of our country. Our chaplain this morning will be introduced by the gentleman from the 104th House District, Representative or Chairman Chuck F. Strachan. Chairman F. Strachan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I have the great privilege of introducing today a respected pastor in my district and a great friend of mine, Pastor David Brunson. Pastor Brunson is the founder and senior pastor of Trinity Life Church in Decula, Georgia, and he's served in that role since 2002. Pastor Brunson takes his worship, praise and worship, and scripture reading very seriously, and he begins every day with a morning Bible reading. We're also very honored to have here with us today Pastor Brunson's wife, Tara Brunson, who's here at the Capitol and is watching these proceedings right now, and I'd ask that we please recognize her at this time. Pastor Brunson has said that his ministry conviction comes from 1 Corinthians 9:16. For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I do not preach the gospel. If you would, well, it's my great honor to at this time recognize Pastor David Brunson.
Good morning. First, I want to thank Speaker beloved Ralston for this invitation. And then I came to encourage you all with this thought, the legacy of great leaders. Solomon was considered the wisest earthly king that ever lived. In Proverbs 13:22, looking at the Common English Bible, it says, good people leave an inheritance for their grandchildren. Good people lead families and leave legacies behind. All of you are leaders and families, and certainly great leaders of our state. And so I'd like to acknowledge your outstanding leadership. Solomon understood the importance of leaving a legacy to future generations. And I'd like to say to you that your work impacts the lives of Georgians now and into the future. Great leaders are three things to me. They're consistent, they're caring, and they're hopeful. You're great because you exhibit a pattern of exceptional leadership. As you deliberate on behalf of your constituency, be consistent concerning the health of this great state. As you legislate, seek to do the right thing with passion. Govern fearlessly with transparency and honesty. Great leaders are great because they genuinely care. They care about the citizens they represent. You serve the people today and the future of the people of our tomorrows. Your work is not easy, and many may not understand the weightiness you carry. But for the health of our collective futures, continue to care. And then finally, in this short devotion, great leaders remain hopeful. In the face of adversity, remain hopeful. Our state, our nation, and our world experience the horrors of an unforeseen pandemic. Unfortunately, there are no crystal balls that we can use to predict what's going to happen in our future. No one knows what holds tomorrow except our God. But great leaders fear God above all else. And so remain dependent on the God that blessed America as he continues to bless this great state of Georgia. I'd like to ask you to stand with me as we go into a word of prayer. Lord, we give you thanks for the gift of life and opportunities to serve in capacities that impact our world. We thank you for the legislators of this great state. We pray that you shower them with wisdom and courage as they serve and represent their constituents. And God, we ask that you may always protect them and their families. Amen. May we recite the Pledge of Allegiance together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Doorkeepers will unlock the doors. Chair recognizes Chairman Hogan, the chair of the Committee on Information and Audits.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Information and Audits has read the journal of the previous legislative day and found it to be correct. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, 4 things you can't get back: a stone after it's thrown, a word after it's said, the occasion after it's missed, the time after it's gone. Thank you.
Chairman Hogan, the chair of the Committee on Information and Audits, reports that the journal of the previous legislative day has been read and found to be correct. Is there any objection to the confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none and the journal is confirmed. The clerk will read the resolution establishing the order of business for the day.
Mr. Burns, on order 59th, moves the following be established as the order of business during the first part of the period. Unanimous consents. Introduction of bills and resolutions. First reading and reference of House bills and resolutions. Second reading of bills and resolutions. Reports of standing committees. Third reading and passage of uncontested local bills and resolutions. First reading and reference of Senate bills and resolutions. Morning orders.
Is there any objection to the adoption of the resolution establishing the order of business for the day? The chair hears none and the resolution is adopted. First reading of bills and resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill 809 by Representative Davis, the 87th, Scott of the 76th, McLeod of the 105th, Taylor of the 91st, and Schofield of the 60th. Bill being titled Act to amend Code Section 1613-2, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to conditional discharge.
Judiciary non-civil.
House Bill 810 by Representative Buckner of the 137th, Stevens of the 164th, Mathiak the 73rd, and Nulowitz the 42nd, Schofield of the 60th, and others. Bill being titled Act to amend Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to sales and use taxes.
Ways and Means.
House Bill 811 by Representative Cooper the 43rd. Bill being titled Act to amend Title 43 of the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to professions and businesses.
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 812 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Maynard of the 56th, Lopez of the 86th. Bill being titled Act to amend Chapter 66 and Title 36 of the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to zoning procedures.
Governmental Affairs.
House Bill 813 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Maynard of the 56th, Lopez of the 86th. Bill being titled Act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 9 of Title 32, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to general provisions relative to mass transportation.
Transportation.
House Bill 814 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Maynard of the 56th, Lopez of the 86th. Bill being titled Act to amend Chapter 66 and Title 36, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to zoning procedures.
Governmental Affairs.
House Bill 815 by Representative Lim of the 99th and Thomas the 21st. Bill being titled Act to amend Article 3, Chapter 36 and Title 36, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to annexation.
Governmental Affairs.
House Bill 816 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Scott of the 76th, Parker of the 101st, Lopez of the 86th, and Maynard of the 56th. Bill being titled an Act to amend Chapter 8 of Title 50 of the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to the Department of Community Affairs.
Judiciary.
House Bill 817 by Representative Lim of the 99th, and Maynard of the 56th, and Lopez of the 86th. Bill being titled an Act to amend Code Section 34-8-192 of the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to initial determination and redetermination of eligibility.
Industry and Labor.
House Bill 818 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Scott of the 76th, Park of the 101st, Lopez of the 86th, Maynard of the 56th. Bill being titled an Act to amend Chapter 7 of Title 44, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to landlord and tenant.
Judiciary.
House Bill 819 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Maynard of the 56th, Lopez of the 86th. Bill being titled an Act to amend Article 7, Chapter 14 of Title 44, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to foreclosures.
Judiciary.
House Bill 820 by Representative Mitchell of the 106th. Bill being titled Act to amend Part 7 of Article 7 of Chapter 3, Title 20, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to Hope scholarships and grants.
Higher Education.
House Bill 821 by Representative Mallow of the 163rd, Mathiak of the 73rd, Gaines of the 117th, Neal of the 74th, and Moore of the 95th. Bill being titled an Act to amend Article 3, Chapter 7 of Title 48, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to tax returns and furnishing of information.
Ways and Means.
House Resolution 452 by Representative Cooper the 43rd, a resolution urging the Georgia Department of Public Health to take action to increase child and adolescent immunization rates.
Health and Human Services.
That completes first readers.
Second reading of bills and resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill 782 by Representative Ballot of the 163rd, Stevens of the 164th, Hitchens of the 161st, Petrie of the 166th, a bill to amend an act creating the Chatham Area Transit Authority. House Bill 783 by Representative Stevens of the 164th, Mallow of the 163rd, a bill to authorize the governing authority of the City of Savannah to levy an excise tax. House Bill 784 by Representative McLaurin of the 51st, Bennett of the 94th, Evans of the 57th, Park of the 101st, Moore of the 95th, and others, a bill relating to Brady Law regulations. House Bill 785 by Representative Maynard of the 56th, Marin of the 96th, Lopez of the 86th, Lim of the 99th, Thomas of the 65th, a bill relating to elections and primaries. House Bill 786 by Representative Maynard of the 56th, Lim of the 99th, Thomas of the 65th, a bill relating to elections and primaries. House Bill 787 by Representative Wynn of the 89th, Park of the 101st, Lim of the 99th, Lopez of the 86th, Marin of the 96th, a bill relating to Emergency Communications Authority. House Bill 788 by Representative Park of the 101st, Wynn of the 89th, Lim of the 99th, a bill relating to Brady Law regulations. House Bill 789 by Representative Lim of the 99th, Wynn of the 89th, Park of the 101st, Lopez of the 86th, and Marin of the 96th, a bill relating to employment and training of peace officers. House Bill 805 by Representative Carpenter of the 4th and Clark of the 147th, a bill relating to alcoholic beverages. House Bill 806 by Representative Paris of the 142nd, Thomas of the 39th, Davis of the 87th, Cannon of the 58th, Mitchell of the 88th, a bill relating to health. House Bill 807 by Representative Cooper of the 43rd, by bill relating to medical and other confidential information, House Bill 808 by Representative Schofield of the 60th, Scott of the 76th, Burnell of the 77th, Davis of the 87th, McLeod of the 105th, the bill relating to labor and industrial relations, House Resolution 427 by Representative Earhart of the 36th, Ridley of the 6th, Powell of the 32nd, Barton of the 5th, Belton of the 112th, and others, a resolution creating the House Study Committee on Public Funding, Transparency, and Membership of the State Bar of Georgia. House Resolution 428 by Representative Gaines of the 117th, Wiedauer of the 119th, Dempsey of the 13th, Jones of the 25th, Maynard of the 56th, a resolution creating the House Study Committee on Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder. House Resolution 429 by Representative Maynard of the 56th, Holly of the 111th, Thomas of the 65th, Bodie of the 62nd, Lim of the 99th, a resolution recognizing the presidents of historically black colleges and universities and dedicating a bridge in their honor. House Resolution 430 by Representative Scott of the 76th, Schofield of the 60th, Davis of the 87th, Burnell of the 77th, McLeod of the 105th, a resolution urging the governor to remove the Commissioner of Labor for neglect and dereliction of duty. Senate Bill 285 by Senator Jones of the 10th, the bill to amend an act creating the Henry County Water Authority. Senate Bill 297 by Senator Miller of the 49th and Hatchett of the 50th, a bill to amend an act to providing a method of compensation for members of the Board of Education of Hall County. Senate Bill 298 by Senator Miller of the 49th and Hatchett of the 50th, a bill to amend an act creating the Board of Commissioners for Hall County. Through second readers.
Reports of standing committees the clerk will read.
Representative Matt Dubnik of the 29th District, Chairman of the Committee on Education, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Education has had into consideration the following bill of the Senate. It's instructed me to report the same back to the House with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 153 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted. Representative Matt Dubnik of the 29th District, Chairman. Representative Barry Fleming of the 121st District, Chairman on the Special Committee on Election Integrity, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, your Special Committee on Election Integrity has had in consideration the following resolution of the House, and it's instructed me to report same back to the following recommendations. House Resolution 98 to pass by committee substitute. Respectfully submitted. Representative Barry Fleming of the 121st District, Chairman. Representative Chuck Martin of the 49th District, Chairman of the Committee on Higher Education, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Higher Education has entered into consideration the following bills of the Senate. It has instructed me to report back to the House with the following recommendations. Senate Bill 81 do pass. Senate Bill 204 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted. Representative Chuck Martin of the 49th District, Chairman. Representative Petrie of the 166th District, Chairman of the Committee on Human Relations and Aging, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Human Relations and Aging has had under consideration the following bills of the Senate. It has instructed me to report the same back to the House with the following recommendations. Senate Bill 215 do pass by committee substitute. Respectfully submitted. Representative Petrie of the 166th District, Chairman. Representative Jan Tankersley, the 160th District, Chairman of the Committee on Intergovernmental Coordination Local, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Intergovernmental Coordination Local has had under consideration the following bills of the House and the Senate. It has instructed me to report same back to the House following recommendations. House Bill 709 do pass. House Bill 744 do pass by substitute. House Bill 762 do pass by substitute. House Bill 771 do pass. House Bill 778 do pass. House Bill 790 do pass. House Bill 791 do pass. House Bill 792 do pass. House Bill 793 do pass. House Bill 794 do pass. House Bill 795 do pass. House Bill 796 do pass. House Bill 798 do pass. House Bill 799 do pass. House Bill 800 do pass. House Bill 801 do pass. House Bill 802 do pass. House Bill 803 do pass. House Bill 804 do pass. Senate Bill 294 do pass by House substitute. House Bill 797 do pass. Respectfully submitted. Representative Jan Tankersley of the 160th District, Chairman. Representative John Corbett of the 174th District, Chairman of the Committee on Motor Vehicles, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, Committee on Motor Vehicles has had under consideration the following bill of the Senate and has instructed me to report same back to the House with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 115 do pass by committee substitute. Respectfully submitted. Representative John Corbett of the 174th District, Chairman. Representative Rick Jaspers of the 11th District, Chairman of the Committee on Transportation, submitted the following report. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Transportation has had into consideration the following resolutions of the Senate. As instructed me to report same back to the House. Following recommendations: Senate Resolution 39 do pass by committee substitute. Senate Resolution 102 do pass by committee substitute. Respectfully submitted, Representative Rick Jaspers of the 11th District, Chairman. That completes the reading of the reports of standing committees.
We're going on now to the local calendar. Third reading and passage of uncontested local bills. What purpose does Chairman Martin rise? I'm sorry. What purpose does the Speaker Pro Tem rise?
Make a motion.
State your motion.
I'd like to move that House Bill 798 be removed from the local calendar and sent back to the committee from which it came, intergovernmental coordination.
Lady has moved that House Bill 798 be recommitted to the Intergovernmental Coordination Committee, and I think there was an objection. There is an objection. Does the lady move?
I move.
The lady moves. The lady's motion is that House Bill 798 be removed from the local calendar and recommitted to the Intergovernmental Coordination Committee. All those in favor of her motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Stacey Evans rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that House Bill 798 meets all the requirements for a local bill to be passed in this chamber?
I'm not sure, but I'm sure if the lady so states that she believes that to be true. What purpose does the Speaker Pro Tem rise?
Yes, sir. Is it not true that members of
Parliamentary inquiry?
Yes, sir. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that members of the Fulton County delegation were never informed of this local legislation that triples the salary of the county commission chair and doubles the salary of the other county commissioners, an action that they can do for themselves and wouldn't take effect until they run again for election?
I'm sure the lady believes that to be true. All right, one final parliamentary inquiry. What purpose does Representative Stacey Evans rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that this bill was in fact shared with all members of the Fulton County delegation per our local rules? And isn't it further true that less than 3 legislative days ago, this body voted unanimously to raise the pay of the county commissioners of Catoosa County in a way that would make them more than triple, I believe, but also if Fulton County were to raise their pay for its commissioners at the same scale that we did for the Catoosa County commissioners, then the Fulton County commissioners chairman would be making $250,000 a year. This bill simply asks that he makes $130,000 a year, which would put him on par with other metro county populations of the size of Fulton County. Isn't it true?
Ladies, inquiry addresses itself to the judgment of each and every member. Have all members of this House voted? Have all members of the House voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the lady's motion The ayes are 98, the nays are 65. The lady's motion has been adopted. This bill will be removed from the local calendar and recommitted to the committee from which it came. Okay, we're now going on to the local calendar without House Bill 798. One bill on the local calendar relates to homestead exemption and requires a recorded 2/3 roll call vote for passage. Third reading and passage of uncontested local bills. If there is no objection, we will vote on the local calendar as a whole with a recorded vote. Hearing none, it is so ordered. The clerk will read the local calendar.
House Bill 709 by Representative LaRicki of the 169th Waycross Judicial Circuit. House Bill 744 by substitute by Representative Anulowitz, the 42nd City of Smyrna. House Bill 762 by substitute by Representative Maynard of the 56th Fulton County. House Bill 771 by Representative Thomas of the 39th City of Austell. House Bill 778 by Representative Hill of the 3rd City of Ringgold. House Bill 790 by Representative Cameron of the 1st City of Chickamauga. House Bill 791 by Representative Wilkerson of the 38th Cobb County. House Bill 792 by Representative Meeks of the 178th Wayne County. House Bill 793 by Representative Meeks of the 178th Wayne County. House Bill 794 by Representative Howard of the 124th Richmond County. House Bill 795 by Representative Jackson of the 128th Glasgow County. House Bill 796 by Representative Gaines of the 117th Athens Clark County. House Bill 799 by Representative Drennan of the 85th City of Clarkston. House Bill 800 by Representative Perkle of the 155th Ben Hill County. House Bill 801 by Representative Irwin of the 28th Stevens County. House Bill 802 by Representative Irwin of the 28th Stevens County. House Bill 803 by Representative Ralston of the 7th Fannin County. House Bill 804 by Representative Leverett of the 33rd City of Hull. Senate Bill 294 by House Substitute by Senator Harrell of the 40th City of Chamblee. House Bill 797 by Representative Gaines of the 117th Athens Clark County.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered on the local calendar? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall these bills now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bills on the local calendar will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Fry rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that in the memory of the clerk of the Mayor and Commission of Athens Clark County, this is the first time in 40 years that the local delegation has tried to pass a homestead exemption without being requested to?
If the gentleman so states, I know he knows his history. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of the bills on the local calendar without House Bill 798 are 108. The nays are 56. These bills, having received the requisite constitutional majority, are therefore passed. What purpose does the Majority Caucus Whip, Representative Kelly, rise?
Make a motion.
State your motion.
Mr. Speaker, I'd make a motion that we are served notice for reconsideration on House Bill 797.
Okay, the gentleman has served notice of his intent to seek reconsideration on House Bill 797. The chair was in error. That bill needed a constitutional 2/3 majority, so it did not pass. But the motion is to reconsider the action by this House in failing to give it the requisite constitutional majority. Okay, since we're now in the last 3 days of the session, the motion will be taken up at this time. All those in favor of the motion for reconsideration will vote aye. What purpose does the majority caucus whip rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move that we table House Bill 797. Oh. Got it.
Yeah, it'll have to be reconsidered.
All right. Yes, sir.
There'll have to be a majority vote to reconsider, and then I'll recognize you again for that motion. All right, all those in favor of the gentleman's motion to reconsider this House's action on House Bill 797 will vote aye. Those opposed to reconsideration will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines.
He doesn't have to move to table it. It's basically just
Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the gentleman's motion that this House reconsider its action. The ayes are 101, the nays are 60. This House has reconsidered its action on House Bill 797. What purpose does the majority? He waives. That bill will just remain on the local calendar. Okay. We are now through with the local calendar for today. We're going on now to morning orders. Going on to morning orders. Chair will remind the sizable number of members who have signed up of the 10-minute time limit for morning orders. The chair recognizes Representative Leverett for a morning order. Chair recognizes the Dean of this House, Dean Calvin Smyrie, and Chairman Chuck Martin for a morning order.
Mr. Speaker, ladies in the House, I know I won't have but a minute, but I just want to get your attention for a second. We have a resolution that's coming, the chairman and I, along with the Speaker and members of the House, honoring Steve Wrigley, the Chancellor of the University System of Georgia, who's retiring. And I've known Steve Wrigley for a long time, and the resolution talks about his helping guide Zell Miller's efforts to improve the level of education with the Hope Scholarship. And he served as Chancellor of the University System of Georgia for 4 years, which time the agency won the Exceptional Agency Award from the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association for excellent leadership. And whereas the University System of Georgia experienced record enrollment reaching an all-time high of 341,000 students. And it goes on and on talking about the number of degrees offered during this COVID period of 70,800 degrees, the most in the university system history. And I just think we ought to give a round of applause and thank Steve Wrigley for his service to the state of Georgia, not only here at the Capitol under Governor Miller, but also during his time at the University of Georgia and here in the university system of Georgia. So we'll have the resolution this afternoon So please, if you all would recognize the service that Steve Wrigley has given to our state and let him know how much we appreciate his contribution to the state of Georgia. Thank you very much, Steve Wrigley. We appreciate you and thank you. And on behalf of this House, congratulations on your retirement. Thank you.
Now the chair recognizes Representative Leverett for a morning order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, it's my distinct pleasure and honor today to stand before you to recognize someone that I believe everybody in this House has admired and respected, and that is Tom McCall. I think everybody who ever knew Tom in this body, and he didn't pass away, so you don't have to stand. I don't think he would like that. But Tom would appreciate that gesture, I'm sure. By the way, I think we all know that Tom will absolutely, positively hate the fact that I'm doing this. He is going to hate the fact that I've got a privilege resolution that will be approved today in his honor. But I think that I have never known a man more humble who had no reason in the world to be humble whatsoever. He is one of the most capable and intelligent and dedicated people I know. And he has made, I don't know anyone who is more dedicated to remembering in this body the people that we represent back home and making sure in everything we do, in every piece of legislation we pass, that we always would ask how it affects them in their everyday lives. And Tom did that through a relentless scrutiny of every proposed legislation with his uncompromising common sense. I am told, although I was not have the pleasure of serving with him, that if you stood in this well and he stood to ask you a question and began it with the words, "You mean to tell me that?" you didn't feel real good about the chances of your legislation passing. So I appreciate so much the opportunity to recognize Tom. I know we don't have a lot of time. I would just like to remember some of his famous wisdom. Don't forget where you came from. Agriculture is on the front of the seal of the great state of Georgia, and the Senate is on the back side of the Capitol. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
I don't know of a more decent or honorable person who ever served in this body than Tom McCall. And I still miss him. Chair recognizes Chairman Chokus and Chairman Efstration for a morning order.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I've got to say some things about Greece. With the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Greece ceased to exist as a nation. Massacred and enslaved, the Greeks endured 400 years of tyranny and persecution at the hands of the Muslim Ottoman Turks. The oppression was so great that even the Greek language and the Christian faith had to be taught in secret schools throughout what was formerly Greece. Even today, the Christian Greek minority living in Turkey are forced to overcome obstacles put in place by the Turkish government simply to practice their faith. The Greek Orthodox Seminary in Halki was closed by the Turks 20 years ago, and Hagia Sophia, the largest Christian cathedral until St. Peter's was built in Rome, was turned into a mosque in 2018. So on March 25th, 1821, began a revolution against oppression that led to a free and independent Greek nation. Supported by Philhellenes from around the world, such as Lord Byron, Greeks from the villages and towns took up arms and began their war of independence. The Greek Revolution was inspired by our very own War of Independence, and George Washington, one of our founding fathers, is praised in Greece for his bravery. Over the last 200 years, Greece has been a loyal ally to the United States in every major conflict, and even facing overwhelming firepower and manpower, the first victories of the Second World War were achieved by the Greeks against the Axis powers of Hitler and Mussolini. Winston Churchill once said, "Heroes fight like the Greeks." So today, the ancient land that created Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and many more great thinkers and philosophers, and the land that gave birth to democracy, celebrates the 200th anniversary of its independence. And to my Greek-American brethren, Chronia πολλά Ελλάδα, zito eleftheria, which means many more years to Greece and praises to freedom. Thank you.
The chair thought that was Greek.
I think I broke it.
Greece.
Opa. Tell me that thing, see if I can fix it. I think I broke it. Oh, jeez. Thank you.
Oh, because it's...
Yeah, I broke it.
Yeah, that's not going to work. You want all the pieces, Holly?
Mr. Chairman, I thought that little outburst of Greek there was you were putting into Greek. I move that this house adjourn sine die. Chair recognizes Chairman Houston for a morning order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's woman in history that I would like to recognize is Eunice Lassiter Mixum, also known as Miss Eunice. And if you lived in South Georgia, you have probably heard her name or met her or she taught you. Miss Eunice was a farmer's wife, a teacher for 30 years, a non-paid political consultant, a community leader, a participant in television programs and movies, and she even made a national TV commercial when she was over 80 years old. Miss Eunice's involvement in politics began in 1974 when she served as Governor George Busby's Tift County campaign chairman, and thereafter she worked with Governors Joe Frank Harris, Zell Miller, and Roy Barnes, and she was friends with every governor since 1974 until her death on 2018. Miss Eunice served for many years on the State Democratic Party Committee, though if you had to classify Miss Eunice for being with any particular party, she was the South Georgia Party. And she promoted Tift County and South Georgia every day of her life. Miss Eunice served in over 15 state boards and commissions. They included the Heritage Trust Commission, the Georgia State Elections Board, the Agorama Foundation Board, the Georgia Student Finance Commission that she served on for 23 years, and she also served on the Georgia State Bar Disciplinary Board. And when she retired from the Georgia State Bar Disciplinary Board, they did a scholarship in her honor. Miss Eunice served on so many local boards, if I named them all, I would run out my time. So if you'd like to read more about Miss Eunice and her accomplishments, you can go to the University of Georgia, Richard B. Russell Library for political research, and all her papers were archived in Athens. So if you have time and you want to read about other great Georgians in politics, go to the Richard Russell Library of Political Research, and be sure and look up Miss Eunice Mixum. She was a friend and loved by people in South Georgia. Thank you.
Time for morning orders has expired. Those of you who had signed up, if you wish to be put on the list for Monday, then please see the messenger. What purpose does the chairman of the Rules Committee rise?
To make a motion.
State your motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Senate Bill 46, Senate Bill 95, and Senate Bill 219 be recommitted to the Committee on Rules.
The chairman has moved that Senate Bills 46, 95, and 219 be recommitted to the Rules Committee. Mr. Clerk, can you read the caption first to Senate Bill 46?
Senate Bill 46 by Senator Burke of the 11th, Watson the 1st, Hatchett the 50th, being titled an act to amend Title 31 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to health so as to authorize certain medical personnel to administer vaccines during the public health emergency.
On the gentleman's motion that Senate Bill 46 be recommitted to the Rules Committee, is there objection? Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so ordered. Mr. Clerk, would you read the caption to Senate Bill 95?
Senate Bill 95 by Senator Ginn of the 47th, Beach of the 21st, Albers the 56th, Anna Duarte of the 31st, Kirkpatrick of the 32nd, to be entitled an act to amend Title 50 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to state government so as to provide conditions for meetings and public hearings to be held by teleconference.
On the gentleman's motion that Senate Bill 95 be recommitted to the Rules Committee, is there objection? Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so ordered. Mr. Clerk, would you read the caption to Senate Bill 219?
Senate Bill 219 by Senator Ginn of the 47th, Albers of the 56th, Mullis the 53rd, Parent of the 42nd, being entitled an act to amend Title 3 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to alcoholic beverages so as to provide for regulation of the manufacture, distribution, and sales of malt beverages.
On the gentleman's motion that Senate Bill 219 be recommitted to the Rules Committee, is there any objection? Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so ordered. Those bills are back in the Rules Committee. We're going to be at ease a moment while the clerk's office repairs the damage inflicted on the well by the chairman of Small Business Development Committee. What numbers? What purpose does the Chairman Stevens rise?
To make a motion,
State your motion.
I'd like to move that Senate Resolution 135 and Senate Bill 142 go back to the Rules Committee.
Chairman Stevens has moved that Senate Resolution 135 and Senate Bill 142 be recommitted to the Rules Committee. Is there objection? Clerk will read the caption.
Senate Resolution 135 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and Council of the 46th, a resolution proposing an amendment of the Constitution of the State of Georgia so as to provide for sports betting in this state. Senate Bill 142 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd, Miller of the 49th, Jones of the 22nd, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 27, Title 50 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to lottery for education, so as to provide for the lottery games of sports wagering in this state.
On the gentleman's motion that Senate Bill 142 and Senate Resolution 135 be recommitted to the Rules Committee, is there any objection? Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so ordered. We're now going on to the rules calendar. Going on to the rules calendar, the clerk will read the caption to Senate Bill 202.
Senate Bill 202 by Senator Burns, the 23rd, Miller, the 49th, Dugan, the 30th, Ginn, the 47th, Anderson, the 24th, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 21 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to elections and primaries generally, so as to provide that persons or entities that mail absentee ballot applications shall mail such applications only to eligible registered electors who have not only requested. This bill then referred to the Special Committee on Election Integrity. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by Rules Committee substitute.
Before I recognize Chairman Fleming, I want to make an announcement that there are two Rules Committee amendments to this bill. And before you start saying you don't have it, you don't have it, because they're outside the chamber on the tables. So at some point you may want to pick those up. The Rules Committee amendments to Senate Bill 202. Chair recognizes Chairman Fleming to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you today Senate Bill 202, which is a combination of measures dealing with elections either already passed by the House or Senate, or measures already considered or passed by the two committees of each House, dealing with, obviously, election matters. This House has already debated and passed the majority of the provisions in the contents of Senate Bill 202, so I will focus during my time on the matters which are new. First of all, I would bring to your attention two provisions in the bill that I refer to as county accountability. The Senate sent over to us two different bills, different versions of the ability for our State Board of Elections to have some oversight, if necessary, of counties who continuously have problems with their elections. And in this legislation in front of you is a combination of those, providing basically two types of remedies. The first one is one that was requested by the Association of County Commissioners, and that deals with the ability for a review panel to be put together. Election workers from other counties and state election officials to come in and study what may or may not be going wrong in a particular county with their Board of Elections and making recommendations for changes. If that doesn't work, there is another provision in the bill whereby the State Board of Elections, after findings and due process and hearings, can actually step in and make changes themselves to the problematic county Board of Elections that is at issue. This follows the constitutional path which has been laid out in prior legislation regarding school systems. As many of you know, and has been discussed in our committees quite often, in Georgia, if there is a school system, for example, that's about to lose their accreditation and their kids can't even get into college with the diplomas from that school system, there are provisions in our law where after due process and certain hearings, changes can be made to help those school systems get back on track. It is a temporary fix, so to speak, that ends and the control is turned back over to the locals after the problems are resolved. Another new provision in the bill regards the prominent posting of changes to precincts when there has been an old precinct that has to be closed and a new precinct is opened somewhere else. The requirement comes from Senator Merritt's bill in the Senate, whereby at the old precinct you have to make a prominent posting to be sure that voters who may come there by mistake know where to go to the new precinct. There's also provisions in this bill which help deal with the problem that so many of us faced and heard from our constituents dealing with multiple absentee ballot applications. In this bill, there is a requirement that if you are going to send out an absentee ballot application to a voter, you first must do a very common check, which is already done by some groups, to see has this voter already voted, number one? Have they already requested an absentee ballot? If they have done that, you don't send another to them, cutting down on the confusion. The bill also makes some changes to the prior House version dealing with drop boxes. Now there is a provision that if there is a pandemic or emergency type situation, you can move those drop boxes outside of the early voting precinct. Also in the bill is an expansion of weekend early voting. There has now always been one Saturday required in law. Now there will be 2 Saturdays required in law, and there will also be 2 optional Sundays where the counties can make a choice of that. Also in the bill is an audit power for absentee ballots and absentee ballot applications that will exist for 2 years after the election. Additionally, as a new measure, is guidelines for judges who have to take into consideration whether or not they should extend voting hours. There has been no guidance in our polls for that power that they have traditionally had. There is guidance in here now as to exactly how they would utilize that. Also in the bill is a provision that allows for water if necessary to people who are in line to vote within that 150-foot area. Within the 150-foot area. Outside that area, there aren't restrictions, generally speaking, on your interaction with voters. However, this bill puts that in place. There also in the bill is there is an allowance for if you do go vote at the wrong precinct, within the last 2 hours of voting, you will be allowed, if you make a statement that you don't have time to make it back to your precinct, that you can vote provisional ballot and it will be counted in the last 2 hours of voting. Also in the bill is something I commonly refer to as denominator language, but this is something that the state of Florida does. The voting precinct will report, and the counties will report, when the polls close, how many people early voted, how many people voted absentee, and how many people voted day of, so you get a number that the count ultimately works toward. In the bill also is a requirement that once the counties begin counting, they not stop until they are finished with their actions. That also will be helped by other provisions of the bill which speed up the tabulation process and get it done faster. so we can hopefully be like other states who tend to get their elections in on election night. There is in the ballot for the first time a requirement that if a voter wants to see the scanned images of ballots, they can actually do that. They can make a request and they can see those scanned images. So if you want to go to County Commission District 5 in your county and actually look at the votes and count them yourself, you would be able to do that going forwards. That is a part of a bill that we brought in by Representative Shay Roberts, House Bill 659, or a version of that. The Speaker did mention there are 2 amendments to the bill which will be outside. They are what I would say, one is certainly a technical type amendment. The other one is very close to that. They do 2 things. The first amendment simply says that in the requirements in the bill for counties to post things on websites, that they have to, if they don't have a website, they simply have to post it in a prominent location. That is the First Amendment. There are some small counties in Georgia, ACCG requested this, that still do not have websites that are accessible where they can make changes. This would allow them to post it in a prominent place if they don't have a website. The second one simply requires that the name of the precinct be put on an absentee ballot application of where the voter would be registered to vote. That is already done when you go vote in person. When you get your ballot and look at it, it not only has the number of the precinct, but the name up there. The absentee ballot simply has the number. This amendment will place the name of the precinct there. As I mentioned, those are new sections in the bill. Since we previously passed legislation out of the House dealing with this issue, I have not covered those prior measures because we have debated them at length here in the House. Ladies and gentlemen, the bill greatly expands the accessibility of voters in Georgia and greatly improves the process of administration of elections, while at the same time providing more accountability to ensure the integrity that the vote is properly preserved. Mr. Speaker, that is the basics of the bill. I would be happy to answer any questions.
You do have some questions if you care to yield.
Yes, sir.
Chair recognizes Chairman Oliver to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, Counselor, I'd be happy to.
Lines 402 and 1402 and 1403.
And tell me which section you're in, Counselor.
In section 28, page 55.
And I'm sorry, say the lines for me one more time.
1402 and 1403.
Yes, ma'am.
I believe this requires the voter to put his or her birth date on the outside of the envelope.
No, it does not.
Well, it says.
It requires them to put it on the inside of a sealed envelope where nobody can see that date.
In relation to that requirement, whether it's
hold on one second. Representative Park, Mr. Speaker, seems to have a question, but she's not letting Representative Oliver ask hers, and I'm having trouble hearing Representative Oliver. Representative Cannon, I'm sorry.
One member at a time is recognized, Representative.
Isn't it true whether...
I apologize, I just couldn't hear you.
Thank you. Isn't it true whether or not this birth date requirement is inside or outside, that this matter has been litigated in federal courts and has been questioned in federal courts and declared to be problematical? Isn't it true, sir, that reinsertion of this requirement is further putting our local counties in peril of additional expensive federal litigation?
No, ma'am, you're incorrect, and here's why. You are correct that it has been litigated, but it has not found to be improper. So if someone wants to bring a lawsuit, which many are brought about election matters, it could be litigated again. But so far, the courts have found that it is proper.
Final question, if I may.
Yes,
sir,
ma'am.
if you yield. The burden of litigation over this bill, which creates enormous number of additional legal challenges, the financial burden of that is essentially going to fall upon our counties. Isn't that true, sir?
Yes, ma'am, because your party constantly sues us in the counties.
Win, sir.
You
And
only got half
constantly
the
win,
credit.
sir.
They constantly lose because they're wrong.
Chair recognizes Chairman Petrie to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Representative, is it not true that the absentee ballot identification requirements in this measure is similar to states all over this country?
Absolutely.
And do you further yield?
Absolutely.
Is it not true that that list actually even includes the states of California and New Jersey?
It does.
Identical.
Very similar.
And do you further yield?
Yes.
And is it not true that that information, for some reason, has not been shared by the press as it should be?
I would agree.
Is that not true?
I would absolutely agree.
Thank you, sir.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. I'll take a few more.
Chair recognizes Representative Bruce to your right for a question.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, Representative.
On lines, is it not true that on lines 1436, section 28, I'm sorry, section 28,
You
lines
said 1436?
1436 through 1438, that the early voting period for a general runoff will be as short as 3 days when if this happens during the week of Thanksgiving.
The gentleman is wrong, and here's why. If you look at section 1436, the subsection B, it says as soon as possible prior to the runoff. That section, that language goes to early voting and runoff. And if a county can possibly have it sooner, they can do it.
Will the gentleman further yield?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true that more than 2 million voters cast their ballots during early in-person voting during the 2020 season?
In which state? Our state you're talking about?
Yes.
I don't think it was that high, but I know it was high.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you further yield?
Yes, sir. I'll take one more question.
Chair recognizes Chairman Knight to your right for a question.
To the gentleman in the well, do you yield?
Yes, sir.
I just want to refer back to the prior question that you took regarding section 28 and the issue in regarding the birth date, saying that it's been litigated. Isn't it true that up under Georgia law that the official list of voters in Georgia is the voter certificates which contain the name, the address, and the birth date?
That is part of the official voter registration process in Georgia, yes, sir.
So why would we litigate trying to take the birth date off of this voter certificate, which is signed via, everyone signs an oath that that is who you are and you are in fact voting?
So I would say that there is quite a mystery as to why much of the litigation has been filed by the left against some of our voting practices. Highlighting what you have said would be the litigation where they actually sued us in the state of Georgia to do away with signature verification on absentee ballots. Now that we're doing exactly what they sued us and asked us to do, they're fighting us on the bill to do it. So if the gentleman is pointing out irony or inconsistencies with the opposition to voting and voting rules and regulations, he is exactly right.
Isn't it further true that we've had instances in the Spalding County where voter certificates were not completed and people are not officially recognized as having been voted?
I know from talking to the gentleman and other representatives from your area that you indeed have had such problems.
Thank you, and I want to thank the gentleman for exemplary and hard work on this bill. You've truly put a lot of hard work into it, and I appreciate it. And on behalf of Georgians, thank you for what you've done and the time you've taken this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that too. And Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. We have a number of members who wish to speak to the bill, and the Rules Committee has limited debate to 1 hour. I will allocate equal time to both sides. So beginning with those that are opposed to the measure, the chair recognizes the Dean of this House, Dean Smyrie, to speak to the bill.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise to oppose Senate Bill 202, and I want to thank Mr. Speaker for giving me the privilege and honor of serving on the Special Committee of Election Integrity. And I've served on a lot of committees in this House and over my years here in the General Assembly in this House, and I can't think of anyone that's been more important than the one that I'm serving on now. And I've taken it in a very serious manner, and I want to thank both sides of the aisle in the committee, the chairman, and members of the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus. I want to thank both of the leaders. I've had conversations with you all, and because this is the most fundamental and sacred right, and the right to vote. So I come today, I spoke on SB 531, and I'm here again. They've asked me to speak on SB 202, and I thought about it last night, and I was in a very solemn mood. I had talked to a lot of people, and my thoughts went to Primus King, who was born in Columbus, Georgia. He was born in 1900, and I remember Primus King was an ordinary person, really not brought up very read, and he didn't have much of that, and he became a barber, and then one day he wanted to vote, and he was turned away and not allowed to vote. And I remember going to his funeral and remembering that aspect of it, and Primus King died as a hero. And when I think about Senate Bill 202, I think about some of those rights that Primus King were confronted with. And in this bill, there's so many sections to it. That we started off, but it's a 94-page bill with new language in all but 2 pages, and 52 sections, and a lot of my members are going to be speaking on the various sections of the bill, and I was asked to say a few words on the section dealing with the election period, early voting, and the election period during the general and during the runoff, and I stress mostly for uniformity in our state, uniformity in the fact of the matter that our states, our counties, and throughout the state is one of those areas that we wanted to make sure that people got the right to vote and early voting. And on behalf of my caucus, I just want to say this to you all as members, that in closing, we as state legislators, our aim is to ensure that all voters, particularly voters of color, have full, meaningful, and non-burdensome access to the one fundamental right, and that is the preservation of all other rights, and that's the right to vote. That is the right of citizens to access the ballot box and elected candidates of their choice. Our vote is both a tangible measure of who we are and aspire to be as a state and as a nation. For these reasons and others, the Georgia House Democratic Caucus has taken a position, and for these reasons, we oppose Senate Bill 202 as presented by the Rules Committee substitute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Erica Thomas to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Knowing that we are in the civil rights capital of the world, I would be remiss not to get up here and to do an excerpt from one of Congressman John Lewis's speeches. Brothers and sisters, do you want to go back or forward? Your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool that we have to create a more perfect union. Not long ago, people stood in unmovable lines that had to pay poll tax. They had to pass a so-called literacy test. And another occasion, a woman who was asked to count the number of jelly beans in a jar to stop her from voting. It is unbelievable that there are still some people that are trying to stop people from voting today. You are changing the rules, cutting the polling hours, and making more requirements to vote. That's not right, that's not fair, and that's not just. Too many people fought, bled, and died for our right to vote. So you ask me, why do we rally? Why do we protest voter suppression? It's because our ancestors are looking down right now on this House floor, praying and believing that our fight and that their fight was not in vain. So we call on the strength of Congressman John Lewis in this moment, because right now, history is watching. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Alexander to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the voter suppression bill, otherwise known as SB 202, a bill that severely lacks integrity despite passing out of a committee that was supposed to deal with election integrity. We cannot undermine free and fair elections in Georgia because of baseless and unproven claims of fraud. Those who have echoed election fraud conspiracies without evidence under the guise of election integrity for years have laid the groundwork for this culture of fear and intimidation. However, over the course of the next few minutes, I will pose a series of questions, which I believe are relevant to the debate in which this body is now engaged. Now, I represent Paulding and Douglas County, but I believe that the other 157 should be protected and advocated as well. This ledger of voter suppression would have a negative impact on counties from Catoosa all the way down to Camden, and this body has repeatedly chosen to ignore this. It was one of my chief concerns with HB 531, and it continues to aid in my annoyance with SB 202. Now, we have heard testimony from county election officials from the ACCG that more time is needed to fully understand the fiscal and logistical impacts the provisions in these bills would have. Given the substantial changes we'd be making with this legislation, why not take more time to get county input on the proposed legislation and take this up next session? In this bill, we're requiring counties to pay for new security paper. Why don't we have a sense of what additional cost that would be? Because this is an unfunded mandate on our counties. Based on testimony heard from ACCG and estimates from a similar proposal in Arizona, this could be double the current cost to counties, potentially over $1 million in additional costs. They've asked the state to take this additional cost, and this is something the state is prepared to take on. They asked that question, is this something that the state is prepared to take on? And if so, shouldn't a physical note be attached to this legislation? Additionally, we know the security paper required in SB 202 and SB 62 would increase costs from 12 cents per ballot to about 25 cents per ballot. Election security recommendations from the Bremen Center note the state should print enough paper ballots for 100% of registered voters, plus provisional ballots for at least 35% of registered voters. These are election fail-safe contingency recommendations in the event of a massive voting machine or poll book failure. There are currently 7.3 million active registered voters in Georgia. Following the Bremen Center's printing quantity recommendations at 25 cents per ballot. The additional cost to counties would be $1.2 million. Again, this is unfunded mandate in our counties. SB 202 would require ballot drop boxes to be constantly monitored by a poll worker, police officer, or security guard located inside advanced locations. A resource from National Vote at Home Institute estimates that the average election worker is paid $16 an hour. Now, because Atlanta is the whipping board, we go take their figures. In Atlanta, the rate of an officer is about 28 and 92 cents per hour. Using these figures as a range, we estimate the average labor cost for drop box security at 22 an hour. For a party that preaches fiscal responsibility, running up a bill and then expecting counties to pay for it is about the most fiscally irresponsible thing that one can do. I would advise my Republican colleagues to pay their bills. Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Representative Lopez to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition of Senate Bill 202. Much has been said about how this bill is about transparency and restoring confidence in our elections. It is not. Close to 2.5 million Democrats voted in the general election in 2020. Those voters are represented in this chamber. Yet Democrats in this House were left out of any meaningful input into the drafting of this bill. Democrats also represent a vast majority of the minority voters in this state, their voices silenced by this one-sided process. How is that transparent? If this bill was truly about restoring confidence for voters, we would have worked together to get this bill right, because we all want fair, accessible, and secure elections. The false narrative of election fraud is what's behind this bill. Here's a fact from the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. By their population projections, it will roughly take 10 years for Georgia to become a minority-majority state. I've never been afraid of change. I lost a lot early in my life, and that made me resilient, like my community. The residents of House District 86 sent me here and are asking me to take a stand against this bill. In my county of DeKalb and House District 86, voters overwhelmingly adapted to change by voting absentee and utilizing the very popular drop boxes. Not only are drop boxes convenient, but they gave great confidence to voters that by directly depositing their ballots at a secure location, they didn't have to worry about their ballots getting lost in the mail. There were 33 secured and monitored drop boxes in DeKalb for the November 2020 election. This bill would reduce them to around 9. For something that works so well for voters, why are we now taking it away? We know that they work well for voters. The truth is that this bill targets a county like mine and minority voters because we have the votes to change elections in the state of Georgia. Lastly, I also represent the 1 million Latinos living in this state, a 96% population increase from 2000 to 2010, currently making 9% of Georgia's population. We are a complex segment of this great nation because, like all of you, we are complex human beings. But I can assure you that as we mature into Georgia's electorate, we will choose those who stand with democratic values. We will choose those who do not refer to human beings as illegals. We will choose those who stand with DACA Georgians. We will choose those who oppose separating fathers and mothers permanently from their U.S. citizen Georgian children simply because they committed a traffic infraction. We will choose those who embrace change and progress. And while we might not have the votes to defeat this bill today, that won't be for long. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Representative Lim to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
and good day, fellow members. This is my first time speaking at the Well, and it's not lost on me the privilege I have to be here. I didn't imagine I'd be in this position back in February 2009, a month I'm noting because it was actually the first time I gave testimony to members of this body regarding my experiences with Georgia's election laws. That time it was in front of the House Governmental Affairs Committee, where I engaged with and answered questions by several people some of you revere deeply. A former representative, now Congressman Austin Scott, then Representative Alicia Morgan, and even one predecessor in the position I currently hold, the late Hugh Floyd. And I told them all what I'm about to tell you, something that unfortunately remains relevant 12 years later. As an immigrant from the Philippines, I proudly became an American citizen in 2007. The very next year, I tried to vote in the November 2008 elections in Gwinnett County, where I've resided since 2001. Anticipating large crowds on election day, I sent an absentee ballot application over 30 days before. But about 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the Secretary of State saying, wrongfully and inexplicably, that I was not a citizen and asking me to present voter ID, particularly my proof of citizenship. At the time, I thought simple enough, and as pure luck would have it, I had a couple weeks to fix the problem. Turns out I'd need every single second. I ended up having to fax my voter ID upwards of 4 times to the Gwinnett County Board of Registrations and Elections. Even then, I didn't get confirmation that they counted the provisional ballot I cast until weeks later. That's why I rise today to stand in opposition to SB 202. As my own experience has shown, it doesn't matter even if folks are able to send acceptable voter ID with their absentee ballot applications and completed ballots. It's unavoidable that voter ID laws will still flag many of them. Now, perhaps you believe voters should have to work a little to cast their votes, but that hard? Then imagine the legitimate voters who don't vote until later and who won't have the time or technology to cure their materials once they're inevitably flagged. And likely flagged not just once, but as in my case, repeatedly by a county board that no matter how they've been reconstituted or not reconstituted, will no longer have the resources under this bill to properly process the materials they've been inundated with. All of these provisions could ultimately also violate the Help America Vote Act, which prohibits the act of challenging voters en masse to prevent them from voting in an election. It's these folks I ask you all to think of. Whatever instances of voter fraud you see, please recognize SB 202 will do far more harm to good people who are trying to do something we consistently ask of folks in our democracy, and that's simply be engaged. And I would hope, particularly those of you who know me personally, you'd count me among those good people, someone who, despite my experience, continued to remain engaged, refused to become cynical, and also remain steadfast that others, regardless of our differences, are good people too. To wit, while campaigning, I repeatedly touted the fact that as an advocate, I worked proudly and productively with members such as Representative Ed Setzler, who would carry amendments for me on civil rights bills, and even became friends 6 years ago with someone I'd eventually join as part of this year's freshman class, that is Representative Tyler Paul Smith. We disagree on things, sure, but we still see infinite value in one another as human beings. And ultimately, that's what I'm asking you to do today, to see the value in me and other voters like me. Even if you vote yes on this bill, I share my story in hopes that for the next 12 years and beyond, we can at least dialogue better about our election laws. And I hope you can at least start to see when we pass laws like these, we're taking the promise of American democracy away from well-meaning, hardworking, legitimately voting Americans like me. Mr. Speaker, thank you sincerely, and I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Buckner to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where is the need for the bill coming from? The former president who wanted the election fixed and thrown out, even when Georgia leadership told him they couldn't do it if they wanted to. Most of us received thousands of emails saying they don't trust the Georgia election, claiming it fraudulent. In an attempt to share with you the rural perspective of this bill and how it affects election offices and rural voters, I talked to several election workers in several counties, and most of them had telling responses such as, "Why are you doing this when you can't prove there is rampant fraud?" What I'm about to tell you is their stories, their comments. The first was, "Do you trust election officials in Georgia? I find it very interesting that people on both sides of the aisle wanted me to steer clear from saying our current Secretary of State did some things right in the 2002 election. And last spring, when there was more unknown about the pandemic than known, most of the poll workers in my area were in the risk age group for COVID. The primary election was unique with new election machines, postponement of the primary, and the decision to mass mail absentee ballot applications, which was intended to be a protective measure for the poll workers and Georgia voters. Implementation of the primary was rough. Lots of complaints due to lines and glitches regarding operation of the new equipment. Remember, in the spring, people were scared, nervous, and frustrated. In the summer, there was increased training for all poll workers, and November 2020 election was smooth. Shorter lines with people voting on average in 3 minutes or less. More voters than ever. The new machines worked. Recounts, risk-limiting audit, and a GBI audit came back clean. All of this in a historic worldwide pandemic. So how does this bill help to build voter trust and confidence? The bill has had so many changes the House website couldn't even keep up. The name Election Integrity Act, the use of opinions not facts, unproved allegations, assumptions that we did not do our job is highly offensive to those of us election officials on the local forefront, and it suggests that we do not have integrity. Making changes to the early voting times, the last day to turn in absentee ballots, Sunday voting, promoting uniformity statewide, removing local control and flexibility, requiring new supplies, procedures that are redundant. What are the costs? There's no fiscal note. Nobody knows. Drop boxes go away. They come back. They're put inside. They go outside. Absentee proof verification, picture ID, just a number. What number? Provisional ballots. Do they count? When do they count? The bill adds up to more burdens and cost and returns to old practices that were abandoned years ago for security, convenience, and safety. Regarding the appointment of a civilian to head the State Board of Elections, who can ultimately take over the local election boards if they are underperforming. What does that mean? If a county increases from the usual customary 23% voter turnout to 43%, is that underperforming because the percentage is too small? Or is it underperforming because it's suspicious? Or is it really overperforming that some people just don't like? If there is a problem, why not use the Secretary of State's legislative arm? There are already judicial remedies in the code, and aren't the courts the ultimate nonpartisan decision-making branch of government? I suspect we would all swear our elections were honest, especially since we're sitting here today. Yet SB 202 says we were elected in a time of significant lack of confidence in the Georgia election systems, and that there was rampant voter fraud. In the words of a longtime poll manager, where's the proof? We were in a worldwide pandemic and the system worked. Systematic change is unwarranted, and what happened in 2020 is not a baseline to use. It is an outlier for years to come. We should not overhaul the fundamental part of our democracy based on an outlier. Please vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Al Williams to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did something that I rarely do. I jotted down a few notes. I rise today in opposition to SB 202. It's fascinating to me where this right to vote, which is held in high esteem by everybody, because folk voted, the state panicked. Because folk voted, calls from Mar-a-Lago now dictates what Georgia does. Because folk voted, the The call for Mar-a-Lago is parroted by Hannity and then becomes an obsession. Lindsey Graham, back when he was about right until he fell wrong again, said he wanted to see 10 proven fraudulent acts in his state, and he couldn't find any. Couldn't find any here. Why are we here? We're here to hold the hand of a sobbing, fetal position ex-president. We're here because he crossed the legal line, threatened an elected Secretary of State, who I guess you call used to be a Republican, threatened his staff, cajoled and promised. And so in response, we wanted to find something wrong. We should have a cheer day for the greatest turnout in the history of Georgia. Instead, we're upset and mad about it. In rural Georgia, folk don't understand this. Tell folk to vote is so important, vote, and when they vote, they're accused of being crooks. Election boards that are doing a good job. Every day I look at the morning, we're moving another election committee out. Something had to be wrong because the guy from Florida shouldn't have lost by 11,000 votes. But ask the two senators that lost by huger amounts. Georgia was tired of him. And I hope he runs again. He wants to run again, where you can go ahead and dissolve the whole thing and give it to him on a silver platter, regardless of what the people say. But I contend to you that down where I'm from, shrimping used to be all destructive. Just everything came thrown on board that you didn't look like, you threw overboard dead. Then we put safety holes in where things could get out that wasn't supposed to be in there. There's a funny thing about a safety net. Certainly works good. But when you put a net like I see in 202, everything dies. And so I end with this. Weapons aimed at Democrats can be used to take out Republicans. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House. You know, I want to give my thanks to a few folks. Normally, I hadn't seen a whole lot agreed with Chairman Fleming much over his career and mine over the years, but I do agree with him on this, and I compliment him on a job well done and his temperament, as well as the members of the committee for the job well done. Now, let me preface my comments with something. The legislative process, not the legislative event. That's what this is about. We come into this Capitol on the second Monday of every January to pass legislation to fix problems that need to be fixed, to repair legislation that needs to be repaired. And yes, my good friend from the coast, wherever he disappeared to, was right. He talked a little bit about the politics of November. But I want to talk about the politics of two cycles in Georgia. In 2018, it was about, the buzzword was suppression. Oh my gosh, nothing worked right. It was about suppression. Y'all remember that? You folks that's up here talking today, remember the word suppression in the 2018 elections? 2020 is about concerns about fraud. So that made it a valid issue that we needed to deal with. And one of the things that we looked at was a system that's broke. The Georgia election system was never intended to be able to handle the volume of votes that it handled because of that age-old belief in local control. We have a state that is growing. It's diverse. It's metro versus rural. It's white, black, brown, red. Very diverse state. But there's a lot of distrust. Partisan distrust. Philosophical distrust. And because of that, the last 2 election cycles in Georgia have been running full bore. So we saw this past election, or after the election, that we have a system that needs to be revamped. When I spoke about local control, 159 counties, ladies and gentlemen, and there's not that much uniformity. We saw a system because of the pandemic this year. We saw some elections boards in some counties that did things that were different than others. And that's not healthy, and that's what led to so much of the distrust, ladies and gentlemen. But I talk about this process. I have seen in 32 years or 31 years, I've seen a tremendous number of hot button issues up here. But I don't think I've ever seen one as divisive. And I mean divisive from a different reason. What is this about, folks? This is about politics. This is about a group called Fair Fight that has got more money than any other institution or any other political action group. They raise money. The pipeline was full going into the elections. The pipeline is full now, and it's still going. They put out 8 million, 10 million, whatever it was, to put out a publicity issue about voter suppression. Let me tell you, those of us that were appointed to this special committee do not think that we don't understand the rules of the game. Do not think that we don't understand about people's constitutional rights to vote, and they shan't be abridged. Because if they are, the federal courts will rule. We laid quiet and got our work done because we couldn't say certain things. We couldn't talk about it during the process out of fear that it was going to be used or misused. I tell the story about a couple of months ago that we had a Friday meeting. The committee was there, and there was a nice lady who was testifying, and she continued repeatedly to use that same word about suppression and about your picture ID, which there was no picture ID in the bill. It was about going to the numbers off of a driver's license. And I politely reminded her that that wasn't in the bill. But I also reminded her that there was no proven fraud from November. It was only in the minds of a lot of people. And there's where the gist was. Well, lo and behold, I left the Capitol at 5 o'clock. And before I could drive to Hartwell, Georgia, it was already out on the YouTube that Fair Fight Georgia and some of those groups had taken my comments and basically had did a little editing job. They didn't say anything about proving. They said Republican lawmaker says there was no fraud. Folks, that's politics. We all know how the game's played. Every one of us in here, we stand and we know how this game is played. The press has not duly reported the facts because I continue to tell them, read the bill. I gave an interview to a TV station last week. I think 5 seconds of it showed up what they wanted it to be heard. I've called people back, and I especially call the people that leave me messages that threaten me to remind me where they know how to find my home, because I damn well hope they do, and they don't have to look on the internet. That's how dangerous this issue has gotten, folks, that people have gotten so emotionally involved because it has been played to the hilt. This is about keeping the money flow going for one organization. It's about the 2022 elections to keep people frizzled and whipped into a frenzy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is dangerous times. When I came to this well on the last on 5/31, I said at that time, folks, there's one color, and it's red. The same color that runs through my veins, runs the same color blood runs through my friend Al Williams' veins. But it's time to take a chill pill, folks. It's time to read the bill. Don't just listen to what you're being told. Actually read the bill. I've answered questions. I want to thank a guy from Jasper County that made an attempt. He called me several times, and his name's Elliot. Nice guy. But he called to ask me, why were we trying to suppress his vote? And I said, well, tell me what you know. Have you read the bill? He said, no, I know what I've been told. And we talked about the voter ID. And when I explained to him that we're getting away from the subjective nature of a signature match that's hard to match when you got so many today that are done with digitalized signatures and all, I said, we're going to use your driver's license number to identify who you are. Is there a problem? No. He said, well, tell me about the drop boxes. And I said, well, let me give you a little history. Have you ever heard the term ballot harvesting? Well, he had never heard of that. Well, I said, well, let me explain to you. There's a difference between ballot harvesting and voter harvesting. Voter harvesting is what we call politics. Ballot harvesting is the actual process. And I said, once upon a time in this state, and probably in most other states, even though they don't like to acknowledge the fact, that whoever the king of the hill was, or the boss man, that prior to, they used to go and tell everybody that worked for them, or those people that they felt they could control, we want you to sign this to get you an absentee. Somehow them absentees all got marked by one person, and they're all carried at one time. That's ballot harvesting, folks. That's ballot harvesting, and it's not right. Because if you believe that everybody has a right to vote, then that person has got the right to vote their ballot and not just pass it over to somebody else. But that was a jest to the drop boxes, so that drop boxes could be secured, to eliminate or to put another obstacle in the way of ballot harvesting. But I listened to some of the opposition to this bill, and all of a sudden, history is repeating itself. The very thing that the Voting Rights Act of the 60s did away with is what you like now because you want to go back to being the new boss man. Is that right? Truest statement's been said is what Brother Al Williams said. The rules of the game will apply to all. They're going to apply to all. But what we've done in this bill in front of you is we have cleaned up the workings, the mechanics of an election system. We've tried to put in every opportunity, lock it into the steel framework of the law. This is how it works. When Elliot asked me about the absentee votings, you're trying to do away with it? No. Did you realize that you could file for an application for an absentee 6 months before an election? 6 months. Folks, we've had some folks that are being investigated because they filed an application, they voted, and went back and voted later because they thought they was voting in another election. This bill is about making a system work, retooling the mechanics of an election system so that whether you're from Hart or Franklin or Fulton or DeKalb, that this system should work the same for every voter. That's what this bill is about, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it's about. But you continue to listen to the politics. You continue to listen to the PR work that's being done. And it's being done for somebody that's making a ton of money. Somebody's making a ton of money by cranking the wheel of dissension, racism, the ugly word. This ugly word but it's being used just as much on one side, if not more today, than on any other side. This is dangerous, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely dangerous to divide not just the nation, but the state. Because a lot of the calls that I have gotten, ladies and gentlemen, aren't just from the state of Georgia. And believe them or not, I'll call them back just as quick, just to ask them one question. Have you read the bill? Show me where there's suppression. There is no suppression in this bill. Now, I doubt that the press is going to say that, even though I did see a couple of the publications in the last couple of days have dared to breach the subject. I read one this morning that said GOP suppression. Gosh, that's funny. They actually increased the number of days on the weekends. That's pretty interesting. That's pretty bold coming from a publication, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty bold coming from the Wall Street Journal article the other day. Generally, I don't care much for newspapers, but the Wall Street Journal has always been one they've always editorialized pretty fairly. But when you see an issue that's gotten so serious that they perpetrate extortion of the corporations to blindly follow, that we're going to protest your business if you don't follow behind, that's dangerous, folks, because then it leads to economic extortion. When we see a member of this legislature who is called to the carpet by clients to tell them, we're going to have to dismiss you and ask for your resignation because you're doing your job whether somebody else agrees or not. Or the senator over there who was dismissed, summarily dismissed. Is that not the same thing that y'all have talked about fighting for years about? You're perpetrating the same poison. Absolutely. What's the difference in that and what you used to say the white man did to y'all? Not a lot of difference. History repeats itself. So I would encourage you, read the bill. Read the bill. We're all brothers and sisters and citizens of the state. But because of the politics, because of the next year's election, but more important, because of that terrible thing called the political money tree, to keep it churning, that's what's creating so much dissension. To those people who might dare to hear what we're saying here today, I would encourage you to read the bill. Don't just listen to me. Don't just listen to my friend James Beverly or my friend Al Williams. Read the bill. Use part of what all this money we've spent for the educational system of Georgia to teach you to do. Read it, understand it, and make your own decisions. Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Chairman Bonnie Rich to speak to the bill. She waves. All right. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. We have a minority report. All right, we have a minority report, and then we'll have the chairman's time. 20 minutes total for the minority report. Chair recognizes Representative Burnow to speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last November and again in January, Georgians made plans to vote. Then they made history. They voted absentee by mail, they voted early in person, they voted at the polls on Election Day. Georgians turned out in record-breaking numbers because they could access the ballot. Lies upon lies were told about our elections in response, and now this bill is before us, built on those same lies. My message to all Georgians is to make your voter plan right now for November 2022 and prove that the last election turnout is the new normal. In making your vote plan, you as a Georgian have 3 ways to vote. First, absentee by mail. Georgians who are seniors or disabled account for more than half of all absentee voters. Instead of celebrating the fact that these vulnerable Georgians could vote safely and securely during the pandemic, SB 202 makes it harder for them to vote. It would burden absentee voters without a Georgia license. It would force absentee voters on the rollover list to receive their ballots 20 days later. It would create an 11-day cutoff for applications that would have prevented even Governor Kemp from voting in November. This bill would also remove the ability of seniors and Georgians with disabilities to return their ballot to a convenient ballot drop box, even though these ballots would now require sensitive personal information. SB 202 is the work of those who don't care about accessibility, safety, or convenience that absentee voting provides many vulnerable Georgia voters. If you are a senior or a Georgian with a disability, if you depend on absentee voting for any reason, make a vote plan now. Ensure your voice is heard. For Georgians that vote early in person, your lines will be longer because of the time limits on absentee ballots and limited number of drop boxes. During January 5th runoff, 2.1 million Georgians voted during these 3 weeks of early vote. SB 202 would cut the early voting period for runoffs down to, at most, a single week, with no weekend voting days. For the last runoff, this would have meant 3 days of early vote during Thanksgiving week, a week when more Americans travel than any other week. If you vote early, make a plan to vote now. This theme of SB 202 of votes lost extends into Election Day voting. Many Georgians, disproportionately Black, cast out-of-precinct provisional ballots on Election Day. They do so for any number of reasons, including not being notified of changes in polling location and the fact that they can vote anywhere in the county during early vote. SB 202 would disenfranchise most of these voters and throw their ballots out. We know that communities of color are disproportionately affected by bills like these. Just look at our state's history. If you belong to a community of color, make a plan to vote. Urge your neighbors to do the same. SB 202 is a work of voter suppression. Its fundamental objective is to keep you, the voters of Georgia, from making yourself heard. If you believe that your voice is vital to this state's democracy, if you believe that we only move forward when every vote counts, then use your ballot to say so. Today, once again, make a plan, and come next election, let's vote absentee, by mail, vote early in person, vote on Election Day. Make your voice count to keep Georgia on their mind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to be a part of the committee. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Representative Hughley to speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The anti-voting rights bill, SB 202, would be a disaster for democracy in Georgia and adversely impact the ability of eligible voters, particularly voters of color, from exercising the right to participate in a free and fair election. In addition to taking power from voices of everyday Georgians, this bill will increase legislative power over elections by stripping authority from the Secretary of State. There are more sections on legislative elections power grabs than any other voting topic in the bill. The majority of these have never been debated on this House floor. These machinations will lead to severe voting access restrictions and place county and state election certifications in unprecedented jeopardy moving forward. If passed, SB 202 would dramatically move power over election authority to the Republican-controlled state legislature. The stripping of Secretary of State's power in Section 4 removes the Secretary of State as a voting member and chair of the state election board. And Section 5 requires the Secretary of State to provide any and all necessary support and assistance to the state election board at the state election board's sole discretion. Section 4 also creates a new state election board chair appointed by the state legislature, giving the Republican-controlled state legislature the power to appoint 3 out of 5 members of the state election board. Section 2 allows only 2 state legislators to initiate a state election board of election takeover process by allowing the state election board to appoint an individual to replace an entire county board of election. Section 5 grants the state election board power to suspend any board of election and fire any election staff following a petition. And Section 6 grants any county commissioner the power to petition the state election board for a complete board of election takeover. Further, SB 202 will require the state election board and the Secretary of State to notify the state legislature 5 days prior to entering any consent agreement settlement to consent order. And it allows the State House and Senate committees on judiciary to overrule any state election board emergency rule under Section 49. This so-called Election Integrity Act of 2021 lacks one major thing: integrity. It's built on the big lie that election officials told citizens over and over again, and now we have this sham of a bill which in some respects is nothing more than a prescription on how to get away with stealing an election. So let's be clear about what this is. This is a partisan power grab done in response to the electoral defeat in 2020 election cycle, where record numbers of Black and brown Georgians made their voices heard and their power known at the ballot box. We will not stand idly by and let Jim Crow 2.0 roll back the clock on our new Georgia. Mr. Speaker, thank you. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilson to speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, we've covered a great deal on the merits of these rewrites, so I won't take you point by point on my objections. But I will say, as the only person here who represents both Fulton and DeKalb counties, that the state takeover portion of this behemoth of a bill is deeply wrongheaded. And it's been stated that the impetus for these provisions is Fulton and DeKalb. So that makes this a potential muzzle on the voices of my constituents in counties that coincidentally cast hundreds of thousands of votes for candidates from my party. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence. There's a larger conversation here that I think we need to have. So let's take the time today to have it. Because I feel blessed, well and truly blessed, to have lived in a time where I could meet heroes like my late Congressman John Lewis and serve in this chamber with Dean Smyrie and Representative Williams. Men, and a whole lot of women too, who stood shoulder to shoulder with those who fought and bled and died for the right to vote. That's who I listen to when we come here to talk about voting. When we in the minority party speak up for our communities to tell you about the inevitable disparate impact on democratic participation this will cause, and get nothing but endless whataboutism in response, all I can conclude is that there are certain people you don't want to vote. I actually don't even have to draw that conclusion when I can just find it in the evidence. Members of the majority have stated they don't want to see vote harvesting, that ideal voters should be invested enough to go out of their way to vote. That isn't democracy. One person, one vote. Not one educated person with free time and an ID card. People don't skip the polls because they don't care. They can't make it because they're busy struggling to survive out there. So with that said, let's talk about what we're really talking about here. Some of you feel that this body has to pass something because of how the people feel. But why do they feel that way? We know why. It's because they've been fed a steady diet of lies and propaganda for decades. On the first day of this legislative session, the Speaker gave us all a charge to underpin our work, saying we must tell our citizens the truth. So let's tell them the truth. Joe Biden won Georgia's electoral votes in the national presidential election, period. After the most thorough electoral investigation in the history of our country, we can say enthusiastically, there was no fraud in Georgia. There was nothing improper about the way our elections were run. There were no mass coordinated campaigns to get felons, non-citizens, or deceased folks to vote. The reason people feel like our elections were insecure is the nonstop, toxic torrent of lies and misinformation spread by Republican politicians through conservative media to voters. All of this work done to supposedly build the public confidence, all 95 pages of it, has been done because of one man and his Twitter account. This is about losers complaining to the referee. Passing this bill is capitulating to the big lie. That's no way to run our state government. Many who will vote for this bill will justify the lies because it tilts the scales and allows the majority to retain power. That's what this bill does. But I'm not okay with that. And you shouldn't be either. Because the people who sent us here deserve better. They deserve their democracy. Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Chairman Mitchell to speak to the minority report.
Mr. Speaker, colleagues, our U.S. Senator, Reverend Raphael Warnock, gave his first speech on the Senate floor last week. His comments were profound and seemed so fitting to close this debate that I am going to use much of his words here. I understand that he is watching, and I hope to do his words justice. For he was honored on a few occasions to stand with our hero and his parishioner, John Lewis. He was his pastor, but Reverend Warnock said he was clear that John Lewis was his mentor. On more than one occasion, they boarded buses together after church services as part of the Souls to the Polls program, urging the Ebenezer Church family and communities of faith to participate in the democratic process. Now, with just a few months after Congressman Lewis's death, and I may add, the same John Lewis that was given the rare honor of having his body lie in state in this very Capitol, there are those in the Georgia legislature, some who dare to even praise his name, that are now trying to get rid of Sunday Souls to the Polls or making it optional, preventing those who pray together to get on a bus together, to vote together. I think that is wrong. As a matter of fact, I think that a vote is a kind of prayer for a kind of world we desire for ourselves and for our children. To be sure, we've seen this kind of voter suppression tactics before. They are part of a long and shameful history in Georgia and throughout our nation. But refusing to be denied, Georgia citizens and citizens throughout our country braved the heat, the cold, and the rain, some standing in lines for 5 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, just to exercise their constitutional right to vote. Young people, old people, sick people, working people, already underpaid, forced to lose wages to pay a kind of poll tax while standing in line to vote. And how do some politicians respond? Well, they're trying to make it a crime to give people water and a snack as they wait in the lines that will obviously make lines longer by their draconian actions. Think about that. They are the ones making the lines longer through these draconian actions, and then they want to make it a crime to bring grandma some water while she's waiting in a line that they are making longer. Make no mistake, this is democracy in reverse. Some politicians did not approve of the choice made by the voters in a hard-fought election in which each side got the chance to make its case to the voters. And rather than adjusting their agenda, rather than changing their message, they are busy trying to change the rules. We are witnessing right now a massive and unabashed assault on the voting rights, unlike anything we've seen since the Jim Crow era. Since the January election, some 250 voter suppression bills have been introduced in state legislatures all across the country, from Georgia to Arizona, from New Hampshire to Florida, using the big lie of voter fraud as a pretext for voter suppression. The same big lie that led to a violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The day after Reverend Warnock's election, within 24 hours, we elected Georgia's first African-American and Jewish senators, and hours later, the Capitol was assaulted. We see in just a few precious hours the tension very much alive in the soul of America. And the question before all of us at this very moment is, what shall we do to push us in the right direction? Surely there ought to be at least a majority in any legislative chamber who believe, as I do, that the four most important and powerful words uttered in a democracy are, the people have spoken. Therefore, we must assure that all the people can speak. But if not, we must still protect voting rights. The right to vote is preservative of all other rights. It is not just an issue alongside other issues. It's foundational. It is the reason why any of us has the privilege of standing here in the first place. It is about the covenant that we have with one another as an American people. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. It is above all else, and it must be protected. In closing, let me say that as a man of faith, I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea, the sacred worth of all human beings, the notion that we all have within us a spark of the divine and the right to participate in the shaping of our destiny. John Lewis understood that and was beaten on a bridge defending it. Amelia Boynton, like so many women, not mentioned nearly enough, was gassed on that same bridge. A white woman by the name of Viola Luisa was killed. Medgar Evers was murdered in his own driveway. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, two were Jewish and an African American, standing up for their sacred idea of democracy, also paid the ultimate price. And we in this body would be stopped and stymied by partisan politics, short-term political gain, legislative procedure. Instead of passing this legislation, I urge my colleagues to support a resolution urging Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, among others, to strengthen and lengthen the cords of our democracy, thereby securing our credibility as the premier voice for freedom-loving people and democratic movements all over the world, and win the future for our children. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well, and that completes the time and speakers for the minority report. Under the rules of the House, the chair has 20 minutes for the chairman's time, and the chair recognizes Chairman Fleming for the chairman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the first balance of my time to the Speaker Pro Tem.
Chair recognizes Speaker Pro Tem Jones for the chairman's time.
Thank you, Chairman Fleming. Well, I won't repeat the many good additions to this package of election reforms that will increase accessibility, increase transparency, and increase election integrity. I will, though, try to provide a little context. I would like to make a few quick responses first. Number one, ballots printed on security paper are worth 25 cents each, rather than 12 cents if it makes them more secure. Number two, 47 counties only offered one Saturday of weekend voting. Senate Bill 202 will require every one of these 47 counties to offer 2 Saturdays of early voting. Number three, a fiscal note is required for state costs, not local costs. But I remind you that the greatest increase in local elections costs contained in this bill will be the requirement to standardize longer voting hours for early voting and 2 Saturdays of early voting. I would hope no one here would suggest we eliminate that because of the increased burden of cost to our local elections officials. And finally, before I have a few other remarks, I'll mention that from 2003 to 2020, last year, 59 bills on elections gained passage in the Georgia General Assembly, at least one elections bill every single year. This is a common operating procedure in this General Assembly. I will also mention that, just for the record, Sunday voting is optional now, and if this bill passes, it will continue to be optional. But do remember, only 16 counties chose to take advantage of that, and I hope more will in the future, but 16 counties in the November election, and guess how many in the January runoff? 6. I honor souls to the polls. I hope more churches do that, but the reality is most of Souls to the Polls is an absentee voter effort. It's not taking buses to early voting precincts, because many of your churches, like mine, members of the church come from many counties. You can't just take them to one early voting place, because they wouldn't just be out of precinct, they'd be out of county, and their vote would not count. And finally, I must say something about the water business. You would think that 150 feet of your currently protected space from campaigning activities was like the 3 miles to walk in snow to school that my father always talked me about. But just to be clear, in the bill, it allows for water for grandma. I would like to return to the parable of the turtle on the post. But first, many of you read as a child or read to your children the children's book series Franklin, about a charming young turtle facing the challenges of growing up, such as dealing with sleeping in the dark or making a trip to the hospital. Franklin in the series is the one who solves whatever issue he's confronting with the guidance and support of his friends and parents. I'd like to think that Franklin could solve how to scale down from a post after an uncharitable stranger strands him there, leaving him to expire from thirst, baking in the scorching sun, as he views the cool stream he was trying to reach on the other side of the road. But we know he could not. He couldn't achieve it on his own. It would take a charitable soul to help him solve the dilemma. Well, I'd say the same for our state election system that was stressed in a manner unseen in modern history in 2020. It won't improve on its own. Without action, it won't address the concerns brought up in 2018 and 2020 and 2018 by the supporters of the losing candidate for governor and president. Without action, concerns over elections accessibility, transparency, and integrity won't be addressed. The pandemic has been thoroughly dreadful, but there are glimmers of silver linings. One of them is a deep dive into our elections processes by the House Committee on Elections Integrity so that we can modernize it, improve it, and make it more resilient and adaptable. Senate Bill 202 reflects this deep dive and improvements to our election system. Some of the stressors that are addressed are the following. A six-fold increase, 600%, in absentee ballots flooding into the postal and elections offices, raising concerns not just about security, but about the many ballots that never arrived or were never successfully voted because voters had relied on unrealistic time periods and rules that were in place. In-person election lines growing ever longer because of the 20,000 out-of-precinct voters overburdening poll workers as they ballot by ballot figure out which elections pertain to which voter in the wrong precinct and which elections do not. That process disenfranchises every out-of-precinct voter for the down-ballot elections that did not pertain. And just keep in mind, this is not a long-standing issue. In 2016, there were only a few hundred out-of-precinct votes. In 2018, there were 7,000. In 2020, there were 20,000. Now, we could change our whole election system, like I believe there are a couple states that do it, where everything is like early voting, where anyone can vote anywhere in the county, but that's a major overhaul, and maybe that's worthy of a future discussion. But that's not how our election system is set up today. Elections officials carefully set out precincts with a certain number of poll workers, a certain number of machines, so that elections can flow more successfully and voters don't get, tired of waiting in line and go home and never vote. Additionally, we had 500,000 absentee ballot requests that were subsequently canceled by voters that voted in person. Many of these ballot requests were made 4, 5, even 6 months out before the November election, and they forgot that they had requested them in the long time period. Tens of thousands of stranded absentee ballots that were never received by voters in time to cast a ballot because they ordered them too late to logistically make the turnaround. Some as late as 5 p.m. on the Friday prior to the election. That's ridiculous. And to say we're shortening the time, we're making it more relevant so that voters' votes will actually count. Long lines because elections officials were not required to split precincts or add voting machines or poll workers in large precincts that had long lines the previous election. That's fixed in this bill. There was anxiety statewide because counties weren't required to begin scanning absentee ballots prior to Election Day. And this is not a criticism of elections officials because our state had never seen such an enormous increase in absentee ballots. The bill lays out reasonable processes so that these ballots are processed in time and voters throughout the state and frankly the nation can know what's going on in Georgia. Senate Bill 202 mandates more in-person voting hours throughout the state. It's utterly not true to suggest otherwise. 134 counties out of 159 counties will offer more in-person voting hours than ever before because of more uniform voting hours, 2 required Saturdays of early voting, and 2 optional, as we have now, Sunday voting or in early voting will be called out for the first time. Additionally, we're changing the start and end dates for absentee ballot applications, another form of early voting, so that it more logically coincides with in-person early voting, and frankly, this is how many other states do it. This change will increase the likelihood of a voter's vote being cast successfully. It will decrease the likelihood a voter forgets 6 months out that he or she ordered an absentee request. Now keep this in mind. 90% of absentee ballot requests made greater than 10 days before the November 2020 election were successfully voted. In contrast, 50% of absentee requests made fewer than 10 days before the election were not voted successfully. That alone requires a change if we really want more votes to be cast successfully. It takes a pandemic, maybe once in modern history, to take an absentee ballot delivery model used only once ever in the Georgia general election, so-called drop boxes, and this bill puts it into law. Now you would think from some of the discussion, these things, these animals had been here for many decades, one election cycle. But now, instead of an expired one-time emergency order that, remember, was put in place to address social distancing concerns by elections officials, these receptacles will be required in every county. The bill establishes a secure chain of custody and a uniform manner for their use. They will be even more secure by placing them inside voting sites, early voting sites, now that social distancing, unless we have another pandemic, and there's a provision in the bill to accommodate that if that happens again, they'll be more secure. Additionally, remember, there were 38 counties that did not offer a single drop box. They count too, and they will be required to offer one. You know, I would hope that someone would come along if Franklin the turtle were left stranded on that fence post, because he couldn't accomplish it on his own. And our stressed election system won't be enhanced by ignoring it or asserting that it will result in things that are not contained in the bill and absolutely will not be a result of it. I encourage you to vote for Senate Bill 202, which makes needed improvements to our elections following newly installed elections machines, an entire new process throughout the state. We've learned where we need to make improvements, a pandemic that stressed our elections and may have changed voters' preferences on how they want to vote. I honor that. The bill honors it. It just puts better processes in place. All of these factors merited the deep dive, and I want to thank Speaker Ralston for creating the Committee on Elections Integrity and for making it such a priority. And I encourage you to vote for a bill that absolutely addresses concerns over transparency and integrity and absolutely allows for more accessibility for every Georgia voter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the Majority Caucus Whip, Representative Kelly, for the balance of the chairman's time.
You know, Mr. Speaker, there's a saying that says a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth can even get its pants on. Well, there's a bus full of lies that's made its way around halfway around the world today. And when it's perpetrated by the media, apparently it's been perpetrated on the Senate floor of our U.S. Senate. Those lies have now been perpetrated in our House, and I don't even think the truth has been able to make it out of bed because of the help we've seen of perpetrating these lies from a U.S. Senator, a former failed governor candidate, and the media that has done nothing but misrepresent the contents of this bill. But here's the truth. Elections should be accessible and secure. And measures that we pass that deal with elections should help make them more accessible and secure. We've heard the lie that this is about the 2020 election. Let's remember who started the conversation about elections in 2018. Made a career out of it. We started this process back in June. We started having conversations with the Secretary of State back in March about some of the concerns that we saw. The fact that anyone would try to make this argument solely about what happened in November or January is just downright false. We began this conversation in June because we saw there was problems with our primary election process. Unfortunately, this body didn't have a chance to come back together and fix those before the November election. So yes, some of the same problems we saw in June happened in November, and they happened in January as well. And now we have the opportunity to come back and address that. But what we're doing in Senate Bill 202 is greatly expanding access for Georgia voters. For the first time in Georgia history, we are making provisions in our code to allow for Sunday voting. For the first time in Georgia history, we are making provisions for drop boxes because we want to expand access. So we can tell the senator, don't worry, the buses can still be cranked. Water will still be sitting there, but the candidates just won't be able to hand it to them. Mr. Speaker, we have a responsibility to Georgians. First, to be honest with them, and second, to make sure that their right to vote is accessible and secure. And that's what we've done in Senate Bill 202, and I'll ask for favorable consideration. And I'll yield the balance of the time to Chairman Fleming.
Chair recognizes Chairman Fleming for the final 3 minutes of the chairman's time.
Mr. Speaker, there have been a lot of interesting questions asked here today, and some of them have already been referenced. One member asked the question about, isn't just this just the loser complaining to the referee after the game? But I wasn't sure, was it the 2018 game he was talking about or the 2020 game? Also, there's been a question of here, why do we need to change the rules just because you didn't like it? Well, why then did Democrats in this legislature introduce 25 bills or more changing our election laws? Maybe somebody else recognizes that a few changes needs to be made. I would suggest to you, if you're looking for more questions about why we're having this debate and some of the things that have been said, you look at a Wall Street Journal article today. It's entitled, Blue State Voter Suppression. And then it talks about the voting laws in states like Maryland, New York, New Jersey, California, even the District of Columbia. How much bluer than that can you get? And it says, where is the outcry over Democrats' earlier poll closing hours and ID rules? Because those states have some of the same laws we do and some of the same ones proposed in this measure. And what do you hear from Democrats complaining about those? The silence is deafening. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem with this bill is it provides a method for somebody to start a campaign in 2022. And what we're trying to do is address the problems in 2018 and 2020 so the 2022 campaign can be run well. This bill you have in front of you today, Senate Bill 202, it does do a few things and it does them very well. It improves access of the voters to the polls. It improves the administration of elections for the people who have to run them in our counties. So I would say to you this, unfortunately, you are about to have the chance to vote on the largest expansion, just one example, the largest expansion of weekend voting we ever have had in the state of Georgia when it comes to the laws in our code. And sadly, I predict Republicans will vote yes on that, and unfortunately, the minority party will vote no. But the only question is, what's new about that? We have heard Jim Crow, we have heard poll tax, and I will remind you, when those things came up, Democrats voted yes, and Republicans voted no, continuously. So history just seems to repeat itself. You're about to have the chance to make voting better in Georgia and also make voting in Georgia more accessible. I would encourage you to vote yes on Senate Bill 202. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. There are 2 amendments that you have for consideration, both of which were offered by the Committee on Rules. The first amendment is AM 281868. Is there any objection to adopting the amendment offered by the Committee on Rules that being AM 281868. Chair hears none, and that amendment is adopted. The second amendment is also offered by the Committee on Rules, and that is AM 281870. AM 281870. Is there any objection to adopting the amendment offered by the Committee on Rules? Chair hears none, and that amendment is adopted. Is there any objection to withdrawing the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is withdrawn. Is there any objection to adopting the Rules Committee substitute as amended? The chair hears none. The Rules Committee substitute as amended is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Al Williams rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that, just for the record, it's been spoken about many times, I'd like to say I'm a proud member of the Board of Directors of Fair Fight.
If the gentleman so states, what purpose does Chairman Rich rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that Senate Bill 202 represents our value of our absentee voting process by providing for basic security that the vast majority of all Georgians want in their votes, including ID requirements, chain of command, and bipartisan review of the absentee ballot duplication process?
That is the chair's understanding. What purpose does Representative Anulowicz rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that within hours of the insurrection at the Capitol, the Trump campaign withdrew their lawsuit against the state and the Secretary of Georgia that was predicated upon lie after lie that was presented to members of this General Assembly and to the public at large?
If the lady so states, I'm sure she believes that to be true. What purpose does the Minority Caucus Whip, Representative Wilkerson, rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that our side of the aisle probably agrees with a lot of the statements that were made regarding falsehoods, et cetera, but we may disagree somewhat slightly on where that was coming from, and it might have been self-reflection that people were trying to push to us when they started talking about a bus and lies and coming back around. I don't know, but that's my parliamentary inquiry. Thank you.
Okay. So noted. What purpose does Representative Bonner rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that it is exactly 859 days since the last gubernatorial election, and a former member of this House's minority body has yet to concede defeat?
If the gentleman so states, I'm sure he believes that to be true. What purpose does Representative Wynn rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that the former one-term president's attorney, Sidney Powell, is currently being sued for defamation in the court of law for spreading lies and conspiracy theories? And isn't it further true that her defense is that no reasonable person should have believed those lies because facts were not being presented? And isn't it further true that Republicans in this chamber and all across our country have peddled these lies and conspiracy theories? And isn't it further true that this bill is a response to those lies and is nothing but Jim Crow but 2.0 and will impact black and brown voters across this chamber, which is why every single black member in this body is voting no?
This is not a pep rally. This is a legislative body. Members will conduct themselves in proper decorum. There was a lot in your parliamentary inquiry, so I'll make that observation. What purpose does Representative Camp rise?
parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that the reason some members repeatedly use the words voter suppression is because it is a poll-tested phrase utilized by Democratic fundraising entities to that end, even when there's no factual basis in Senate Bill 202?
I'm sure the lady believes that to be true. All right, one more parliamentary inquiry. What purpose does Representative Bazemore arise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that not one Democrat was invited to that June discussion with regards to planning for this bill?
A June discuss. I don't know about a June discussion. All right, have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of Senate Bill 202. The ayes are 100. The nays are 75. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Chair recognizes, for what purpose does Chairman Fleming rise?
Make a motion, Mr.
State your
Speaker,
motion.
that this bill be immediately transmitted to the Senate.
Chairman Fleming has moved that this bill be immediately transmitted to the Senate. Is there any objection? There is objection. All those in favor of immediate transmittal will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage, or on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 100, the nays are 74, and this bill is on its way to the Georgia State Senate. Chair recognizes for an announcement Representative McLean. Representative McLean, you have an announcement? I think we can hear you up there. Working Family Caucus lunch in room 310? 310, okay. Chair recognizes the chairman of the Minority Caucus, Chairman Mitchell, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be a lunch in room 216 for the Democratic Caucus upon our recess here, 216 in the Capitol. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the chairman of the House Rules Committee, Chairman Smith, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Rules will meet at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, room 341. Thank you.
All right, I have an announcement, a bipartisan announcement. Please be sure to return your tablets to the clerk's office for charging over the lunch break. Before you leave, return your tablets to the clerk's office. The House will be in recess until 2:15.